one of the amazing experiences I'll never forget is we made it to the NCAA tournament. This was when I was working with Jenny Baranchek, and our roster was such that it was not limited, but it was very short. So we had a number of different spots left. Well, Jenny said, well, why don't you go ahead and just have your daughters sit on the bench? And I have never, you don't really think about something like that because, going to the NCAA tournament in the past couple years, like, as you watch that, there's not many people that get to do those sorts of things, let alone have their 3 kids sit on the bench.
On today's episode of the Left Hash Call, we are joined by a Hall of Fame player, a homegrown Iowa standout, and now one of the most respected head coaches in the Missouri Valley Conference. From dominating on the court at UNI to building a winning culture at Drake, she's become known for her ability to empower athletes, build family-driven programs, and win the right way. Since taking the reins at Drake in 2021, she's led the Bulldogs to multiple NCAA appearances, conference titles, and a style that's fast, fearless, and fun to watch. She's the 2024 MVC Coach of the Year and a voice in the world of coaching leadership. We are thrilled to welcome on the show the head coach of the Drake women's basketball team, Coach Allison Pohlman. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. So thanks so much for the time.
Absolutely.
Anytime you get the opportunity, it's not necessarily really to talk about yourself, but to talk about Drake University, about wonderful women who play this sport and just the game of basketball. Count me in.
Absolutely. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I kind of want to go back just right away to when you got the job at Drake, obviously, or the head coaching job at Drake. Obviously, you were here for a while. What was kind of that process like, taking that job after being an assistant and associate head coach for so long?
Yeah, it was an adventure and a rather large roller coaster. So in one of the amazing things, and Jenny Baranchek is an amazing mentor and lifetime best friend that I will always have and always be one of my first phone calls anytime I have any sort of, whether it's a dramatic question, family question, basketball, business, anything sort of question. But one of the things that she had just stated was you need to react and you need to decide what you want, and then you figure out a way and you go get it. And so in that moment, discovering that she was headed to Oklahoma, it was kind of that gut reaction feel of, okay, I'm going to go for this. And when you go for it, you got to figure out a way to get it.
There, obviously Drake women's basketball has a history and it's historic, and there's a lot of tradition and pageantry involved. Was there a certain level of, okay, I don't want to screw this up, but I also want to make it my own way at the same time? Was there any sort of level with that?
Yeah, great question. And there would be, just because back to, the number of banners that are hung in our gym, all of the storage and rich, storied, rich tradition of success here. I didn't necessarily go to don't screw this up, but there have been numerous times where you just have to understand what it takes to run a great program at a great place like Drake University. And, having all of those things to be able to lean into with the amazing people that have been here, not only successful women student athletes, but coaches. I mean, it is, you just list off a number of names and it's really, really impressive. So, no, I didn't necessarily think that, but it's an amazing place and have just been really blessed to attract the type of student athletes that we continue to attract.
Absolutely. I want to talk about just right now in the summer, how is the summer going, and what does really a summer look like for you in getting ready for not only the fall, but obviously a long season in the winter?
Yeah, so we get 8 weeks of summer access, and during those times, from our program standpoint, we have a build up to really implementing our offensive system. Don't worry, we do play a little bit of defense and do teach principles and a lot of other things, but it's a lot of skill work and it's a lot of developing chemistry. And the best part about the summer is you don't have a lot of the other sort of things. I mean, clearly the women on our team take classes, but it's a really great time for them to be able to spend some time off the court together, and for us all to do some community service, to go do some outings, have a picnic here and there, just those sorts of moments. I think back to, I know you had mentioned family, that kind of stuck out, but that's what families do. They spend even downtime, even boring time, and it happens to be together.
I want to go back to, your journey coming out of high school. What was your recruiting process like? Did you always know kind of UNI was in the back of your mind, or how did that process all kind of shake out?
Really atypical recruiting process. So I actually signed late.
Okay.
Had no idea what I was going to do, where I was going to go. And to be completely honest, I wasn't sure what sport I was going to play coming out of high school.
Really? Wow.
Always loved basketball, but had other opportunities to play other sports or go to an institution where I could play multiple sports. So UNI kind of came onto the scene late. Tony DeCecco I had been recruited throughout the fall. He got the job the fall before my senior year, and so they stuck around a lot. They came to a lot of games I still remember, and I went on a visit there, and my older brother actually graduated from UNI, and to be honest, I'm a homebody, so at the time it was 25 minutes from home. Just made sense, felt really, really comfortable. And I became a Panther.
One of the things, and I'll read this quote. You mentioned your coach, Tony DeCecco, right? I'm pronouncing that right. He once said that you were the player I credit for turning the program around at UNI. Did you know he felt that way? And what does it mean to have someone that I'm assuming you look up to so much say that?
Yeah, I think it's an amazing compliment. I don't necessarily know that I'm worthy of that sort of, I guess that word speak or however he stated that, especially because, UNI it's a phenomenal program. And when I was able to step into, an amazing place under new leadership, Tony DeCecco's era was definitely new once we got there. And so it was really a collective group of us that had decided that, we were going to kind of shift how things were going and being able to put ourselves in the top three, of the Missouri Valley Conference, of trying to compete for whether it's a championship or at least just find ourselves in a very, very competitive league at the top. And so it was definitely a journey, but I wouldn't change anything about it. I was really lucky to have a number of coaches. Tanya Warren, who's now at the University of Northern Iowa, was my position coach in college, and so being able now to ask her questions as well as a mentor, not only as a player but now as a coach myself, has just been a really neat relationship to be able to foster. But it all goes back to those relationships when you're going through it, and people. Whether you need a hug or a kick in the tail, they figure out what it is that you need. And I was surrounded by great people.
Did you always know you wanted to be a coach? Was that something early on that you knew you wanted to do, or was that kind of a little later in the process?
Yeah, way later in the process. I had 0% of interest of getting into coaching even after my collegiate career.
Wow.
But was in an amazing situation, studied dietetics and wanted to, in order to get your RD, you have to do, an additional program through, gain a master's, and then you have an internship opportunity. Well, as I was looking for those, the graduate assistant position at the University of Northern Iowa opened up, and homebody, I might say that a couple times, 25 minutes from home, decided to go ahead and to step into that graduate assistant position. And so there's no looking back from there.
Yeah.
So that kind of turned into a number of other things. And here's someone who was not really interested in getting into coaching. And here I sit today.
You mentioned dietetics. Is that something that you still bring into how you run a program and making sure that, your athletes are taking care of themselves? And is that still kind of how you want to run your program as well with that background?
Yeah, well, I think that there's such a holistic sort of, overall opinion of how to do things and how you're supposed to do them right or do them wrong or however it might be. I definitely have opinions on different things, but there are experts who probably have a lot more schooling and a lot more experience. So I will definitely make some sort of suggestions on what I think or whatever else. But we're lucky enough to be able to have a nutritionist that works with our student athletes when necessary. So and nobody can judge what I eat because it's not necessarily picking in the most effective of manners. But back to, that was, I think that chapter kind of ended as, headed down a different path.
Right. Talk to me about getting the job at Drake for obviously as an assistant coach. What was that process like? And then obviously you mentioned being a homebody, now coming all the way across the country now to Des Moines. What was that whole process like?
And it did feel like coming across the country. I will tell you, that hour and a half or 2 hours from Cedar Falls to Des Moines was what felt like, like an eternity and a really, really long stretch from coast to coast. But had an amazing opportunity, at the time to come and work for Amy Stevens. And one of the things, the role I stepped into was the recruiting coordinator. And it was something that I hadn't necessarily done at the University of Northern Iowa. Did a lot of recruiting, but didn't have that necessarily, that title. And in this occupation, there's only a few people that are lucky enough to say, like, I didn't have to leave the state of Iowa to have an amazing opportunity. And really, as I prefaced, the banners hanging and being a student athlete in the Missouri Valley Conference, watching the Drake supporters and fans and the environment and the community, everything that went along with this program, I felt like it was a sign for us to take a leap of faith and jump in and come to Drake University. And I will tell you, when we hopped in that U-Haul and moved things over, we had triplet daughters that were 9 months old. And so that was a brand new adventure for us, but wouldn't change any of it, and very blessed to have had the opportunity at the time to come work for Coach Stevens.
And then you obviously you were at Drake for 14 years, is that correct? Before taking the head coaching job, you took over during COVID, like right after. I remember I was watching as I was getting ready for the show. I was watching some of your post press conferences, and obviously the masks that were all on us, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that was a thing. But what was it like having to navigate a new role while also navigating a pandemic at the same time?
Yeah, well, it's definitely different. And, everybody says this is so cliche, you're not moving over 6 inches. It's like 65 miles. I mean, it is so different, just the minor and what feels like trivial decisions that at one point maybe you didn't have to make or didn't make as an assistant coach. And now you're making all of those, like in a different seat. I don't know that anybody can ever really prepare you. They can tell you all of those things, but I think the main thing is just having that support system of other people to talk to that have gone through it, because uniquely enough, when you share some of those stories with people who have moved from whether it's assistant coaching to being a head coach, they're sitting on the other end just nodding their head and fully understanding. But that, along with assuring that a recruiting class who had all been committed, that they were still going to come here. That was one of the big first step, getting all of the players that, were currently here, getting them all to stay on board. There's so many different things with the acquisition of a new job and a new role, of all of what feels like drinking from a fire hose is a really great way to state it, but then after that, navigating a pandemic. And really, I thought that, at Drake University, we had such great guidance from our athletic training staff, of our team doctors, of really our administration. And so that portion, luckily, was something that was very, very well handled by them. We could just figure out a way to make sure that we had a team in place.
I can't remember, because obviously COVID started right around March. Were you guys still playing at the time? You guys were still in tournament, got canceled, right?
We sure.
I can imagine, that was obviously really hard to go through. And did you have some fifth years that were thinking about coming back that ended up coming back and ended up not coming back as well? Or how did that all kind of work out?
Yeah, no, we did. We ended up having a couple players that ended up, deciding to go ahead and continue to play. And then, some of the women, like their season ended,
right,
and that was it. And so what makes it really difficult is you feel like you have the control of finality of your season, like you either win or you lose. Not necessarily you're going to not play any longer because of something that's sweeping the nation, and a different, some health board is making decisions for you on how your season is going to end. So those explanations are always very, very difficult, because some student athletes, they didn't have a choice on how they were going to play their last game.
Yeah, I remember being in the football world and going through that. I remember that being really hard for me to watch some of my friends that I had, gone through the program forever, and they're just like, well, we don't get a choice now. And so it was, obviously that was postseason and didn't really have to worry about that side of it, but definitely had some friends affected. Sounds like you're a really proud Iowan. I'm a proud Iowan. What does it mean to not only represent the state, but represent, the city of Des Moines and coaching Des Moines' hometown team today?
Yeah. Well, I am honored to be able to be, in that position alongside a number of other amazing, amazing coaches here at Drake University. But it is, it's just such a special place. And I think, having the opportunity to really represent, our state. But I think our state has so much to be proud of from a women's basketball standpoint. And you look at the storied and unbelievable coaches that really represent our state. You talk about great company and so much rich tradition of success in all of those programs. And I think just as a state, what you find are people who, when Iowa plays Drake, they're going to pick someone to cheer for. But if we are playing anyone outside of the state of Iowa, I guarantee an Iowa fan would definitely be a Drake fan.
Oh, yeah.
I think that that's what makes our state extremely, extremely special. Is you have a lot of people who can wear numerous hats, and they might have them in their closet, to make sure that they're a fan, really ultimately of our sport, but also of our sport of women's basketball in our state.
You've coached some unbelievable players. Obviously, this past season, Katie Dinnebier, am I pronouncing that correctly?
That
You're
is,
right.
yep.
She just wrapped up in one of the most historic seasons in Drake history. I'll just read off some quick stats. Over 23 points per game, 245 assists, multiple 40-point performances, also back-to-back conference player of the year. How do you go about coaching a player of that caliber? And then also, how did you see her develop over her 4 years here?
Yeah. When people ask me that question about her development, it's really difficult for them to understand and believe that her freshman year is really hard to get words out, to be able for her to be a communicator, like on the floor and at all times. And she's a very natural leader, but for that to be able to blossom and to show, ultimately by the time that she was a senior, you just watched the moment when she stepped on the floor. She just had a whole different air and a whole different confidence about her. But as that's developed, I think it's also just a trust, not only in what we're doing systematically, but also in Drake and, her experience here and what she wants to do and what she knows our goals are. There's a lot of conversation had, whether it's on the floor, on the sideline, in huddles, but there's also a lot of conversations that happen like in your office, sitting on a couch or in the hotel in between games, and it's not all basketball, but also just really understanding what makes them tick and how to push buttons and knowing when you need to push buttons. Because sometimes you don't push buttons and sometimes all you need to do is give a high five or a hug. So those sorts of situations. And, I think we've been so lucky to be able to have players that have continued to come back, and the retention piece, and they really, really love and are loyal, to Drake. And to watch that happen, I think just really ultimately goes to their experience.
One of the things that's obviously new to college sports is NIL, transfer portal. It's kind of it's out of hand in some ways, and it's not in the other ways. One of the things that you see at the very tippy top of like college football and high level, men's and women's basketball as well, is you see them getting these big brand deals, right? You get the Nikes and the Gatorade and you name it. But one of the things that I love about NIL is the opportunity for local businesses to step in and be a part of that. Obviously, the pizza place over there on the corner has been a helpful NIL partner with that. How have you seen NIL kind of evolve, and how do you try to use that to your advantage? And then also with the local piece, how have you seen kind of the community step up in that way?
Yeah. I think it's a brand new thing that is it's going to be part of our constant, jargon and, like conversation as the NIL piece becomes more ever present and really seeping into our sport. I think the biggest thing is just, as coaches, it's all about making adjustments. It's all about getting educated, knowing what we're doing, fostering, developing those relationships and really understanding kind of the expectation of whether it's the student athletes on those NIL dollars, or, let's be completely honest, all of these women, and again, collegiately, we're still, they're still getting an amazing, amazing education for free, alongside a number of other things. And so I think it's just kind of understanding really what is at the source of what's ultimately important to each and every one of them. And then, kind of as you talked about the local community and really getting involved. I mean, we have such a great opportunity here in Des Moines, and we have so many local players that have played in the CIML or even closer, even in the state of Iowa, where you can watch them step on the floor, have an amazing amount of success. And I don't understand, it's really, really fun to watch them have that success. And now we just need more of it. We need more, companies, people wanting to keep these players, these people, these highly educated women in our community, because not only are they having an enormous amount of success on the floor, I can't wait to see what they're going to do in their lives after.
Right. How do you think you would have handled that when you were a player if the NIL rules would have been what they were when you were playing?
Well, don't you dare add how old I am, but I didn't even have a cell phone. So my, I guess, I don't know, whatever I was worth as far as, being able to dance on the Oregon Trail. I mean, I'm not quite that old, but you know what I mean? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. And I think, more times than not, you just never know which way it's going to go. You hope everybody is very diligent with saving and investing. And if we're all being 100% completely honest, it just depends kind of in the moment of really what are we doing for additional education. So I don't know what would have happened. I don't know, would have maybe made myself a sign outside Wellsburg. People could have, I doubt it. No, I'm not real sure.
The pork tenderloin place from your hometown probably would have been a great one.
That's nice. Good shout out.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the name of that? Fatties, right?
As you drive into town. Yeah, I could have put what it wasn't.
They would have loved that. They'd be all for that.
I wasn't there when I was there, but there was a drive-in down there that had unbelievable ice cream, and I would have been all for that one. I was gonna say I would have been a frequent attender down there, so maybe I could have gotten myself a deal.
Yeah. You talk about your players like they're your daughters, and you mentioned this before. You have triplet daughters as well. Mm-hmm. What has it been like for them to kind of grow up around these young women in your program as well?
I mean, an enormous blessing. Yeah. I think what's been fantastic is, we've had 13 babysitters, in place if by chance.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Need, a little bit of help, especially as they were growing up. But, they are role models, and they've watched them, a lot of times have success on the floor. One of the amazing experiences I'll never forget is we made it to the NCAA tournament. This was when I was working with Jenny Baranchek, and our roster was such that it was not limited, but it was very short. So we had a number of different spots left. Well, Jenny said, well, why don't you go ahead and just have your daughters sit on the bench? And I have never... you don't really think about something like that because, going to the NCAA tournament in the past couple years, as you watch that, there's not many people that get to do those sorts of things, let alone have their 3 kids sit on the bench, as you're stepping on the court against Texas A&M, so I will never forget those sorts of experiences for them. And I think as they reflect back, looking at as they've watched some of the women that have played, and now them knowing them by name and watching them come back to alumni events, and it just makes your heart sparkle a little bit more because it's such a special place. I can't say it enough, and the people that they've been able to watch grow and succeed, and really both on the floor, but also what they're doing in their lives after basketball.
Are they pretty good hoopers?
I had 2 daughters that, throughout the course, we played AAU basketball, we did all of that stuff, but, a lot of different pivots as far as what they want to do. But I had 2 that, it was really cute at camp the other week. One of our coaches who was the lead had said, say your favorite, kind of basketball memory. Mm-hmm. So my daughters played at Johnston. So I had 2 of them. Yeah. And then it goes through the line or whatever else. And we had a couple of our players that had said, making it to state or winning a state championship. And they get to Sydney, and Sydney goes, winning back-to-back state championships. And so I thought that was actually pretty comical. She had a feather in that cap. But she, none of my daughters will play any sports collegiately. But, but have had an amazing experience with athletics. I think it's so important, and a lot of them did multi-sports.
There was a Des Moines magazine back in 2021. You said, I believe in trusting players to make the right decisions. I want them to be able to play free and be who they are. How do you, balance the level of freedom while also making sure the right things are getting done, making sure that, there is still a structure in place to how you want to do things.
Well, I think it's just the understanding of kind of their thought process, and in the moment, understanding, what reads are they making? What did they feel? It's such a difference, a coach on a sideline, you see things a whole different way. When you're a player and you're in it and you're feeling it, you're seeing it a whole different way. So kind of understanding that I think there's a delicate balance of hearing, okay, here's my coach's suggestion, but here's what I'm thinking on the court. And that always trumps whatever a suggestion happens to be. Because, we're trying to foster basketball players. You want them to step on the floor, play the game, but also, kind of tap into that edginess that has made them really, really good. And we always have had a tendency to attract very high level IQ sort of people who can kind of understand how to read a screen and things. So I think instead of squashing those things of saying, no, that's the wrong way, we try to really operate in the gray all the time.
Yeah. Obviously that comes out in your play style for sure. Where has that play style come from? Has that always kind of the way that you wanted to do things, the way that Drake's wanted to do things? Where did that kind of all stem from?
Yeah, well, I think, it's more than 9 years ago, but working with Jenny Baranchek for 9 years, as when she stepped into this place, one of the biggest things was the up-tempo style, both in the half court and the full court. So we have maintained that, kept that. A lot of our motion systems are exactly what we ran while she was here. There's definitely a number of different wrinkles and a number of different things that we've tried to enhance, and your player personnel every single year it changes. Mm-hmm. So instead of trying to put people into a specific offense, we're trying to foster what makes them special and allow that to shine through, like kind of within our, a systematic, like those parameters. So, So there's definitely a freedom in there, but, just stemmed from a lot of, putting a lot of different things like West Virginia. We watched a ton of West Virginia men's basketball when Pittsnoggle played there, like just a number of different reads of, I don't know, just a lot of different games and trying to put something together that would really allow like freedom of movement where everybody had to be guarded.
I feel like you're a big believer in play basketball to get in basketball shape versus just running them like crazy. Is that kind of how you operate throughout
You are spot on. Yes. It makes it less painful when you actually have like an orange ball in your hands rather than just having to go run. So, and if you phrase it like it's 94 feet, it's
right.
not that bad.
No, it's not. No.
Now, it might be 100 times, but, like it's 94 feet and you happen to have an orange ball or you're trying to make a layup or trying to, track somebody down because you got to guard them or however it happens. I think that goes to the competition piece too. It's a lot easier to compete when you're, trying to get a stop defensively rather than like, hey, let's get on the line and see who's the fastest. We're playing basketball, so that's what we've always utilized to be able to condition.
When you're going through the recruiting process with players, do you look for players that maybe have played in a similar style of system, or is it kind of you're just looking for good players? We'll kind of bring them in and fit them how they need to in this piece?
Yeah, great question. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a sort of where they have to have run, whether it's a motion or something more freelance or a dribble drive. We get that a lot. I think finding just special people who, kind of, you just characteristics wise, everybody on our team shoots the three, everybody posts up, and there might be somebody who shoots the three, but is never, who is allergic to the paint. Katie Dinnebeer, I think, is a great example. And I could give you probably 50 more where it wasn't necessarily where posting up was always in her repertoire in high school. And then she came here and, she made a living of posting people up. Not a lot of guards work on post defense. And so it's great. And her timing just continued to get better and better each and every year as she was in our system. So no, not a specific, like they have to have this sort of thing. I think a lot of times, it's not only fitting our basketball style, but a lot of other things culturally.
Yeah, I remember. So I grew up in Oskaloosa in the Little Hawkeye Conference, and so Grace Berg going to Indianola. I remember her torching our team every single time that we had to play them. Yeah. And it was fun to kind of see her come back to Des Moines and show out. And there's obviously a lot of those similarities, like with Katie and being able to shoot the three, take the ball up down the court, and being able to post up as well. You talk about like this is a family in this locker room, in this team. A lot of coaches will say it with lip service, or they just like to say it because they want to be that way. How do you go about fostering an environment that actually is that is about it versus just talks about it?
Yeah. Well, family can be ugly, at times. So I think it's just overall an understanding of, like what is that connects us. So once we've defined really that what connects us and this amazing experience and overall just, three principles we always talk about is, like, what do you love? You gotta love basketball. You gotta absolutely love competition. And here you gotta love Drake and that experience that includes not only like wearing Drake on the front of your jersey, but also that includes your team. And so I think just fostering and developing that level of trust from our coaching staff to our training staff to our, like all of our team members. It is a process, but, we can all throw around family, but it's just what we do with it. And holding people accountable is not easy. It's not easy to point out some things to people that it needs to be pointed out to, but when it's done so with the right intention in place, and people know where your heart is, then ultimately I think that level of your relationship just continues to grow.
Yeah. Going back to the tempo piece real fast, one of the things that I've always been curious about with any sort of team that goes fast, whether it was football or basketball, whatever the case is, how do you balance going really fast with also being able to execute in those really high pressure situations? Because obviously you're getting more, trips up and down the court, but, there's obviously possessions that are going to end up mattering, and with a minute left on the clock, 2 minutes left on the clock. How do you balance that?
Yeah. I think one of the things, from a practice environment, and we're definitely not perfect by any means. And James Naismith was the one who invented basketball. It wasn't me. But so just that piece of, like a practice plan and what we do in practice and the intentionality of really trying to make our players uncomfortable, because through that adversity or through, throwing different things at them, we're able to grow. And so just ultimately really trying to, in those moments, fully understanding, yes, you're embracing what your feel is, but also understanding time, score, and location. What is it? If we've gone 5 possessions of quick, we're jacking threes as fast as possible, you're going to hear from the sideline, like, could we just please touch the paint at some point?
Right.
And so that doesn't necessarily mean you have to score in the paint, but it might have to touch the paint at least once or twice.
Right.
So that then now we're looking at a couple different things. So I think it's a balance. It's a delicate balance of that, definitely. But I also think, kind of to your original question earlier about, handing over the keys and really trusting our team.
One interview I saw you talking about you learning from your soccer coach about passing lanes and how applying things that you learned from a soccer coach to things in basketball. Is that kind of a common trend for you? Do you look at different sports and think, okay, how could I apply that to a basketball sense?
Absolutely. And I think, truthfully, I think any coach, just listening to different jargon, vocabulary, how they plan practice, what their process is, and, in recruiting, how to identify talent, and just all kinds of different things. I mean, we are all learning something every single moment. And so, yes, I think it's amazing just watching other coaches and how they do things and like what process, so often, we throw together these practice plans and half the time, the first 5 things we'll do, but then after that it's, you're pivoting like none other. I mean, it's just all about adjustments and being able to kind of on the fly make different decisions. So, yes, I think it's great. I think you can learn something from every situation that you put yourself into. Yeah.
You should go watch the UW River Falls offense because it reminds me of your style of basketball where it's, statistically one of the fastest teams. Like they're running, it's a play every other. It's very fast. So it kind of reminds me of that because I think there's a lot of similarities between how you're transitioning and how you're making sure that I don't really know where to go with that, but there's just a lot of similarities in there. Yeah. There's obviously been a rise of, I like to call it a consistent rise of women's basketball, obviously with players like Caitlin Clark and, obviously that in our state particularly has grown women's basketball in general. How have you seen women's basketball in general become, more of a staple in our state and in the entire country over the course of the years?
Well, I think what's been really, really driven is, attendance numbers, as the popularity of really being able to watch some, marquee players. I think attendance numbers have really, really increased, along with probably, I don't know, I'm sure that there's some sort of merchandise sales that have probably skyrocketed. But what I do think we have also, from a social media standpoint and really being able to put out there, I think what Iowans love and any other people, I think they love positive news. And I think what they want to do is hear these great stories, of people, whether it's doing things in our community, whether it's doing things, for their team or their institution, representing things at a different level and not necessarily where it's just transactional and just about them. I think that's what people like. And I think that's where you're seeing we're able to, I think, once again, we're telling those stories. We're telling those great stories about, and we have 13 women on our team, and we have 13 amazing stories that somebody needs to make sure that they share, because it'll make you want to come out and watch and support this group. And we have this here at Drake, and I guarantee across the country, especially, and even in the state of Iowa, we have that many other people that would need to be celebrated.
What does a week of prep really look like for you? Because obviously, when I was a football coach, we got 6 days to prep for this one game,
Right.
So there's a lot of prep that goes into each week, but obviously with how frequently you guys play, I'm curious just what your process looks like. Is there a lot of scouting, or is there a little bit of, hey, we're familiar with that coach, we're familiar with that team, we've played them quite a bit, and how do you kind of have to adjust your practices and maybe your schematics or game plan to any given opponent?
Well, throughout the year, non-conference is definitely a different beast than our conference season. In our conference season is also a different, it's a beast as well. But, I think the biggest thing, and this is Drake University specific, what we do from with our team is we're really self-focused on, okay, how do we have success? What are we going to do in these situations? So just trying to, instead of, show everything that's really, really great and fantastic, and we're not going to be able to stop for the other team, it's more so really trying to shift that focus on, no, this is what we're really, really good at. We should be able to expose these sorts of things. So focusing much, much more on that. Now, don't get me wrong. That doesn't mean that we're not educated and we don't know what other teams are going to do. Because when I say we're self-focused only, it probably sounds like just a touch of arrogance, and that's not the case. Our team is still very, very prepared. It's just not overwhelming to say, everyone that you're going to play against is better than what you are. It's kind of just to say ultimately, hey, this is what we're going to make sure that we're prepared for, but this is also from an execution standpoint, this is what we need to do, and this is what we can do very well.
Is there a certain level of watching film from the previous game with you guys? Is that that's kind of what it sounds like? There's more of, hey, let's go back and watch our game versus spending hours and hours and hours kind of looking ahead versus kind of what spending that time on.
Yeah. And I would say that's very much so for the team, from a coaching staff standpoint. Like I'm surrounded by phenomenal women who know every nook and cranny of everyone, and, probably their majors and maybe their parents' names, sort of deal. So they've done due diligence by watching what feels like at that given time, like way too much film, and also our previous opponent sort of situation. But what we expose our team to, is definitely things that might be a little bit shorter of a list.
Yeah. Hiring a staff. Obviously, I was greeted by your phenomenal staff that helped me bring in all this stuff today.
Yeah.
What is kind of some of your non-negotiables, some of your priorities when kind of putting together staff?
Yeah. I just like people,
Yeah.
I think you can get a feel when you sit in a room for, kind of it's going to sound goofy, but like their energy level. I think energy is a really big thing, because, as we had just previously talked really quickly about, it's really easy to get, whether it's overwhelmed or to spend way too many hours in the office. And when you're doing that, whether it's, you're sacrificing time away from your family, like you also have a family that's here. So just being surrounded by people with great energy who really buy into what our culture is, and love what we're doing here at Drake. And so, I mean, I could throw out a number of different characteristics, but, being passionate, being loyal, loyalty and trust are a really, really big thing around here. And so continuing to be able to build that, not just necessarily when it's stiff and we're, we have to get this sort of stuff done, but also being able to laugh at each other, because if you don't have that and you can't have fun doing it, it's not necessarily why do it, but there's definitely a component of where you can find joy and happiness in doing something that is so amazing as like coaching women's basketball.
I was wondering if you could share a story or a moment where something that was really challenging for you as a player, as an assistant coach, or as a head coach, that really challenged you and how you overcame it.
Yeah, no, great question. As you said, as a player, truthfully, and I think every player goes through this. It just depends upon when and who's there to kind of pick you up. But I still remember my freshman year wanting to hang up and just go back, move home and not play collegiate sports whatsoever. And, I think everybody has those moments. Maybe not. Maybe other people are way, way luckier than what I was in that given moment. But being surrounded by other people that are, I guess, willing and caring enough to convince you or to show you why those decisions are really, really sharp. But I do remember it was in the fall of my freshman year of, just kind of that question, the looming question of why am I doing this? Mm-hmm. And this is really, really hard. And it doesn't seem like it's going to get any easier. But in that situation, once again, just had great guidance and which followed. I was at an impeccable place and it was perfect for me.
Obviously you are a role model to all of these young women in this program. What does it mean to, obviously you're a mother of 3, but also you're a mother of however many players that have come through that program. What does it mean to continuing to get to be a role model to all these people that come through this program?
Yeah, well, it's something that I don't necessarily know that is cherished as much while you're in it, because it feels like there's so many things that are going on that might ultimately at the end of the day be semi-trivial. But what goes to their experience, I think, is, all of the little details and all of the little things that we're willing to do for them to make, whether it's, life just a little bit easier, maybe a transition just a little less, seem a little less daunting. But it's a really, really, it's a special job. And it's not, I think, it's really our coaching staff that needs a lot more, credit on those sorts of things, because, not only, it's not just, we have a number of role models on our team, and just being able to have, the support and the people power, ultimately, because there's different people that are going to connect with different players in a different regard. So I think it's just a special thing to be surrounded by an amazing staff. I mean, our strength and conditioning coach is top notch. Our athletic trainer has now been here for what feels like an eternity, but I think we're going on year 3. But having all of those things in place, retention is a blessing, and being able to have, kind of a consistency of the people that you're surrounded by. So lucky about that too.
What do you think it is about Drake specifically that makes it such a special place to be at?
Yeah, well, administratively, we're very, very well supported. And I think that there's just I don't know. I think there's just an added bit of sparkle, or maybe it's a lightning bolt, one or the other, but it's the people.
Yeah.
I really do think it comes down to the people and people knowing that, you care about them. But when opportunity comes, you got to figure out a way to compete for it. And so I think just that delicate balance of knowing everyone wants the best for each person. So I'm not hoping that you show up today and suck so that then I can look good. I'm hoping that you show up and you're the best version of yourself because I'm going to get better. And I think when we're able to foster those sorts of things and understand that that's the case, instead of, kind of wanting people to take it easy, I think you can do some really amazing things.
Looking forward to this coming season, is there, specific, piece of this season that you're just so looking forward to, or is it do you kind of take the approach of we just got to get better today, or what's kind of, looking forward? What are you most looking forward to?
Tomorrow's practice.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's
no,
good.
for sure. And probably this afternoon of being able to take some time to watch today's practice, just to kind of hone in. The basketball piece is one of those that, as you just dive in, there's so many different details and so many different amazing things to, I don't know, just to watch it uncover. But tomorrow's practice gives us the opportunity to be around our student athletes. And I think that it's not necessarily like, hey, we have to get better tomorrow. Well, that's a requirement and an expectation, but we also have the opportunity to be around one another. So that piece, might be sometimes put toward the wayside, especially when our team is like, no, I can't wait for us to get to practice tomorrow. I don't know that they necessarily are like, wow, she can't wait to hang out with me.
Right.
That's probably not what they're getting out of it, but I also think that's a big piece.
So last little segment here, just some quick hits. You can elaborate on them as much or as little as you would like to.
Okay.
But just kind of some rapid fire questions. First question is best basketball movie of all time.
Hoosiers.
Okay, great. If your team was a band or an artist, who would they be?
Okay, I don't know if I'm going to go for artist or actual Nitty Gritty Dirt Band.
I don't think I've ever heard of them. I'll have to check them out.
The gritty part.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I went for.
Okay.
I went more so the name necessarily than what they sing.
Okay, sure.
Yes.
I'll have to go listen.
Okay.
I'll have to go listen. Okay, cool. If Hollywood was making a movie about Drake women's basketball, who would play you?
Oh, wow. Well, now Ava Hawthorne has had a couple stints as an actress, but probably not Ava, but she does have some experience. Hollywood actress. Ooh, that's a tough one. You'd want it to be somebody fun.
So my mom, she owns a couple hotels around the state, one in Iowa City, one in Grinnell, and she, for lack of a better anything, she is Amy Poehler from Parks and Rec. Like she is like just so excited about everything, and so that is one thing. Like I thought of Kristen Wiig for you, right? That's where my head went, but I'm not.
No, we can go with that.
Kristen Wiig. Okay,
yes,
cool,
I like it.
great. Is there a pregame hype song that you sneak into the warm up playlist?
Well, one of the songs that we have played a lot around here is Gas Pedal.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah.
Okay,
I know,
great.
It kind of signifies just a touch about how we play.
Okay, yes, absolutely. Favorite arena or gym that you've coached in outside of the Knapp Center?
Oh, yes. Well, I honestly would have to say Moline, where we played at Vibrant.
Okay.
Mainly because we've been able to make some really epic memories there.
Awesome.
As conference champions.
Okay.
Back-to-back years.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
If you weren't coaching, what would you be doing?
I'd have to be a golf pro.
Oh, yes.
Not very good at golf, but that'd be fun.
That would be a good one.
I could spend my time doing that. Or maybe a casino dealer.
Wow.
Sounds intriguing.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, that might be kind of fun.
I could
get
totally
to know a lot of unique people.
True. You're a people person, so obviously that's you can. I think that's kind of a requirement in Vegas. But would you do Vegas or would you kind of do one of the local? Obviously, your home body.
I know. I was going to say yes. I'm
learning. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Probably somewhere. Prairie. I've been to
Prairie Meadows is a good one.
Yes.
Yeah, they're a great one.
Yeah, we got stuff. Wildwoods. Yeah, we got all kinds of.
What would be your game of choice? What would you be? Blackjack, deal, poker deal, or?
100% blackjack.
Blackjack. Okay.
Yeah. Or the roulette wheel might be kind of.
That would be a good one.
To operate, because they got that little spin on there.
Yeah. And then I have always thought I would be the craps, the guy that pulls the dice
sweeper?
back. Yeah. You don't do a lot other than obviously the math part would be the hardest part for me.
Right.
I think poker would be better for me in that world. But okay. Most underrated skill in today's game?
Passing.
Okay, great. Love that. Go-to snack or drink on a long road trip?
Ooh. Cheetos.
Okay.
Popcorn.
Hot or not hot?
Popcorn?
No, the Cheetos.
Oh, not hot.
Okay.
Regular. And not puffy.
Okay, yeah.
Just
those
old school original Cheetos.
Love it.
Yep. I love popcorn. Cheese corn especially. Especially it's like from Garrett's.
Okay.
Chicago. I've been real fond of that. And then drink coffee.
Coffee? Okay. Black
hot.
coffee?
No, I usually put creamer in
Okay,
it.
little creamer in there.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Last question here. What's one piece of advice that you would give to the next generation of coaches?
Oh, great question. Oh boy. It's never going to be perfect. But as long as you love on the people that you're surrounded by, you can do some really amazing things.
Thank you for listening to the Left Hash Call. For more episodes, you can go to Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. And be sure to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, or Twitter, and even Facebook if you're into that. And I would really appreciate you subscribing, following, or just continue to listen. We'll see you next time. Peace.